What is going on, Panthers Nation? How are y'all doing today? We are going to try to do this as I attempt to record. I was having some issues just a minute ago. Let me take this banner off. Hope y'all are doing well. I was trying to record and I was getting Wi-Fi connectivity issues, so I'm going to hope that that does not happen. But we are jumping right into it, folks. 53-man roster predictions. Lots to dive into. This is going to be a very fast live recording. So if you're here, buckle up because we've got a lot to get through in about 20 minutes. I guess, yeah, roughly 20 minutes to get this thing done because got to hop off here. So we're going to do this as quickly as we can. I just recorded this. So if you miss it or there's parts of it that you don't get to see, I will have a recorded version of this coming out on the normal podcast. But let's go ahead and jump in. Oh, let's see what we got here. All right, y'all. Lots to dive into. Well, one before I go out here and start talking through stuff, I just want to make sure that nothing has happened through Panthers.com because teams are starting to make transactions and they're waiving 10, 11, 12 players at a time. So I would hate to get on here and then already have some news. Yeah, there's nothing on there. The last one is the activation of Yash. But there are a lot of NFL teams, so it's that time of year, man, and a lot of teams getting down to their final 53 or close to it, not their final 53, but trying to get through. Let's look at. I just want to pull up. I'll share this one really fast. So yeah, Spotrack's a really good resource, NFL.com as well, but Spotrack consolidates everything. So we see the Rams already laying folks off, the Atlanta Falcons, getting my birds messed up. Rams, Bills, Giants, Pittsburgh, Jacksonville, which I saw earlier, the Colts, Dolphins. So it's busy, man. It's happening. And unfortunately, for a lot of the guy, I feel for them because I know this is a difficult, probably 24, 48 hours waiting to find out if you're going to make it onto the roster. But here we go, folks. Let's share this. So y'all, well, maybe you know me, maybe you don't. If you don't, I like to be as educated as I can to educate y'all so you have an understanding of how this is going to play out, or at least how we think it's going to play out. So you really have to set the framework, and maybe you don't care, but for me, I personally like to know as much as I can. So I'm informed and I understand what's going to happen as we get here. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do some homework first. It's going to start with the PUP and non-football injury list. So you have Amari Barno and DJ Wonham, who are on the PUP list, and Jonathan Brooks, who's on the non-football injury list because his injury happened, of course, during his time at Texas where he tore his ACL. We know Yosh was on this list. He was just activated, like I said. The significance of this list is the Panthers can keep these players on their respective list as we get down to cuts, and it will not impact the 53-man roster. So it's important to understand that. Now, the inverse of this, you cannot have a player who's currently injured, and we know there's a slew of injuries. You can't have someone who is injured today be moved to this list. Like all these lists, if you remember, as soon as training camp happened, we had a list of like 6 guys that were on this. Multiple guys have come off that list as they've gotten through camp, and that's pretty much landed us where we are here. So when we get into the roster, I would expect, based off of at least what we've heard with the setback with DJ Wonham, with Amari Barno coming off of his ACL, Jonathan Brooks, I would think all those guys stay on their list, and then we reevaluate or evaluate as we get into the season. IR, this is another important thing to note. So in years past, when you had an IR designation, it was funky the way that the NFL made you do it because you really had to whittle down the roster, then wait, put them on there. You get to put 2 players on IR, and they do, prior to the cuts, and they do not impact your 53-man roster. This is significant for a few things because as we go through the list here in just a minute, you got to think about who on the Carolina Panthers is going to be designated for IR. I personally, as I make my projections on here, have Dane Jackson and Sam Franklin Jr. as my 2 Panthers that will go on IR to start the season. One thing that worries me a little bit is the significance of Sam Franklin's injury. We know broken foot. It sounds like, there's hope that he could return. You never know because it's been a few weeks. Time has passed. You may come back with a different evaluation that says, yeah, we may think we can get him back in December or January. And the team internally decides we're going to put him on season-ending IR. And then that opens the room for someone else to move up into the IR slot there. Dane Jackson, I did have him on here as well. When you stack the injuries, and there are a few, which will go through the list, I think internally, this is what the Panthers have to do. They have to weigh the significance of those injuries and make a decision. So for me, as I make my projection, these are the 2 guys that I have on there. So that's really 5 spots that are opened up on the roster, which I think is a good thing. And of course, we're going to talk about it here in just a second. Hold on one second. My wife texted me. I gotta go pick up Nolan in a minute. That's why this thing's going to be fast. Practice squad protection, and I'm going to shout out Keep Purring podcast, Ben from that show. This all stemmed from a conversation that he had, and it's probably a little bit confusing, but when we talk about practice squad, because that's going to be an element of what we discuss here today, the practice squad protection was something that came about during the COVID years, lasted for, I think, maybe 2, maybe 3 seasons, that allowed you to designate 4 players on the practice squad that were not eligible to be claimed. And our good friend of the show, Mike K, was asked by Panther Statement in this thread and said, did they still have practice squad protections each week? No, that's not the case. So all that culmination is important to understand. The inverse of all this, when you think and you get worried about a Jalen Coker or whoever going to the practice squad, folks, you got to take a look at the entire NFL and think that every single NFL team is in the same bucket as we are. If they were to go out and pick one of these guys up, they got to sign him to the 53-man roster, and they're in the same shoes that we are. And you're talking about worrying about a 5th, 6th, 7th wide receiver giving up whatever else they have on their roster. So I think it's important to understand that element. Now, so we talk about waiver claims. It's another thing where you may get confused if you're a casual fan. When we talk about waiver wires and claims, because there's going to be all these cuts coming through, we got to really get specific when we talk about a waiver or someone getting released. It all has to do with vested years in the NFL. So once the waiver period starts, a vested veteran, which is a player who has acquired 4 years of pension credit, is not subject to the waiver system. So as we go out here and we start to see players getting released, it's important to understand, are they vested or are they a veteran? Because in that case, they're a free agent and we do not have dibs on them in the waiver wire. So no matter how much you like them, that player can go and pick and choose wherever they want to go and land. Of course, we'd hope we get whoever it is. Probably means a little bit more money for them as well. When you pick a player up off of waivers, you're picking up their contract, bringing them over, which I think, and well, I don't know how deep people get into knowing this stuff. That's another significance. So really the pool of players that are going to be out there, it's going to be a little bit smaller than what you think. But without further ado, so we can speed through this, we're going to hop into the offense. Quarterbacks, and I should say, y'all remember, maybe if you followed me, I did 25 and 25. I've curved my prediction to 24 offensive players, 26 defense. Starting off, we have Bryce Young, Andy Dalton. Think that's easy. Jack Plummer, your practice squad quarterback who looked really good against the Buffalo Bills. I don't have any concerns. Most teams carry 2 quarterbacks, so I don't have a concern that someone's going to want to go out here and pick up Jack Plummer. And if they do, they do. So I'm not worried. The next group, running backs, is going to probably maybe confuse or scare or worry some people, but this is just my interpretation of the roster. And I have us keeping 3 running backs right now with the designation, of course, that Jonathan Brooks is on the non-football injury list. A big change in my list. I had Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, and I moved up Mike Boone. And it's not because I don't like Raheem Blackshear, and it's not because I don't think he's good. There's something there. I don't know if we will find out in the next day or two, but him missing significant time and not really seeing him and seeing Jaden Sheridan, seeing Mike Boone get significant carries, I'm a little concerned. I really am. Like, I don't know. I even put a question mark here. So one thing I'll caveat, if in the instance when we go back and look at the IR, if we were making that list that the Panthers decided not to pick one of the 2 that I did want to have a designation on here for, for some of these guys that maybe that's the person that gets picked up. We haven't heard much. So this is like a situation that I'm closely monitoring. And I think it could be a big shock, like, for fans. Now, again, I still think Raheem. To the flip side, if Miles Sanders' contract wasn't what it is, I would look at Chuba Hubbard, Mike Boone, and Raheem Blackshear potentially, just based off of what we've seen. But I think the contract's too big, which is why I leave those. I do look at Jaden Sheridan coming back on the practice squad. I'd love to have Raheem back. Like, if he does get cut or we move on from him. I know Mike Boone spent time on the practice squad last year. It's hard to know right now how this thing's going to pan out. So that's my initial thoughts. Wide receiver, another group that will get folks fired up. When we look at the 53, I have us keeping 6. Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Jonathan Mingo, Xavier Legette. Those are my 4 locks. On the bubble, we have David Moore, who I've kind of slotted up, and Ihmir Smith-Marsette. Now, I hope Ihmir Smith-Marsette is not significantly injured. Sounds like hopefully he's going to be okay. That's something to monitor. David Moore seems to, he's traveled along, of course, like we know, with Canales and Tampa and Seattle. He's made quite a few plays in camp. He's played or returned kicks and returned punts as well. So I think this is going to come down to a numbers game. Terrace Marshall Jr., who I have personally liked through camp, I think he's out. Some people are probably like, I don't really care about Terrace. I think he's doing great. I just know with him being listed on the trade block, I don't know if he's back here, just based off of the way things have settled. We've been through this before, going through it again. I'd love to have him here. I just don't know. Does he go up to Joe Brady, get reunited? I know some fans have talked about that. And on the practice squad, Jalen Coker and Sam Pinckney are my 2 folks there, rounding out your list. The other thing, when we start talking about bottom halves of position groups, especially skilled position groups, it's what can you do for me on special teams? Where can you contribute outside of, how many times are you running a 4 or 5 wide receiver set on the field? Not a lot. So you got to be able to contribute somewhere else on the field. I don't know, game day rosters tweaked a little bit. You're not going to carry the full 53. That's even more of a reason to have some guys in these positions that can also play special teams. So that's your wide receivers. Tight ends, have us keeping 4. I will caveat this group by saying you could make a case to me right now and say we keep 3. But I have Tommy Tremble, Jadavian Sanders is safe. I think this on the bubble conversation is if we really decide we're only going to keep 3 to make up for a position somewhere else. Jordan Matthews and Ian Thomas. Do you like the pass-catching veteran, former wide receiver in Matthews and what he's shown, which I do? Are you going to be this run-heavy offense that needs to rely on an Ian Thomas for his blocking and the skill set? And or what is the injury significance of Ian Thomas? Because that's something we haven't talked about as much. Week 1, is he going to be available? So I put Ian, this group in a bubble, but right now I have those 4. It's not a knock on Felipe Franks or some of the other guys that have done well, but I think that's it. Offensive line, rounding out, keep it simple. Austin Corbett, Damian Lewis, Robert Hunt, Ike Ekwonu, Taylor Moton, Brady Christensen, Chandler Zavala, Josh Nijman. Those are your 8. The 8 that I have locked in. On the bubble, I have Cade Mays, Jack Anderson. Practice squad, I have Andrew Rame and Ricky Lee. Similar to some of the other skill groups we talked about, when you are looking for a backup offensive lineman, you're looking for a backup offensive lineman that can play multiple positions. We've seen it with Brady Christensen. We've seen Chandler Zavala unintentionally have to bounce around. We know Yosh is a swing. So out of those 3, those guys can play multiple positions. Cade Mays, when healthy, that's a question mark because I don't know the significance of his injury as well. Cade Mays can play multiple positions. So that kind of rounds out who I think my actual 9 would be. I like what we saw out of Jack Anderson. I love what we saw out of Andrew Rame as the true center on the team, the only true center that's played it. But I think when you get to the bottom of that list right there, you're not really getting the versatility. And it's just because they're young and inexperienced, but I love to bring them along to the practice squad. So like if we cut it at 9, which I think we will, I'd love to see Jack Anderson retained in that group with Andrew Rame and potentially Ricky Lee. All right, let's keep it going so I can get this sped through. Defensive side of the ball, 4 defensive ends. Derek Brown, A'Shawn Robinson, TJ Smith, LeBrian Ray. Jaden Crumedy, when you start number crunching, I know he's hurt right now. Like I talked about, our IR spots are used up in what I've accounted for. So for me, I think the Panthers are going to have to cut him, hope that he clears, and then they bring him back on the practice squad, potentially, if they decide to keep him around. I would have loved to see him more during the preseason and into camp, but unfortunately, injuries set him back. Defensive tackles, we have Shai Tuttle, Nick Thurman, very easy group. And practice squad, I like Jaden Peavy. He's shown a little bit of promise. And hey, we've got to have some bodies. Why not bring in some bodies on the practice squad that have shown a little bit in the preseason, that have experience so far with this team and keep them around. So I'm all for it. Out of the linebacker group, our 4 that I think a lot of people probably lean into: Shaq Thompson, Josie Jewell, Trevin Wallace, Claudin Cherilus. Those are my 4. This one is unfortunate. So Tay Davis, who we know has had an impact on special teams, played a little bit inside last year at the end of the year. He's got an injury. And I don't know. This is like, these are the questions that they've got to answer. I listened to the Bills radio during the Panthers game when I went to go back and watch the end of it. And they were talking to their general manager on their, radio network, or I guess it was television, but radio, whatever. And the way they're going to go about evaluating this is they've got to get the last injury report. Like, what is the true status of all these injuries? And Tay Davis is in that bucket. And because I don't know, and my numbers are being crunched, and I don't have the opportunity to keep a lot of these folks, I do have Tay Davis moving down, and then Chandler Wooten on the practice squad. I'd love to retain Davis if possible, but at least in this pass, it was hard to do. Outside linebackers, I told you about Pup with Amari Barno, DJ Wonham, so those are easy. Jadeveon Clowney, DJ Johnson, Iku Leota, like those are my 3 locks. Clavon Chasen, still a lot to be desired, but I think just given the numbers game that's here and the potential lack of availability outside of a trade, you're probably not going to get a ton of viable options that are available via waivers. Again, we talk about that non-vested veteran, so they're not a vested veteran. I don't know that you're going to get a lot of a 1, 2, 3 year player in the NFL that's been waived by whoever he's playing for. So I put him in the bucket. I did move up Derek McLendon on my list. So part of the reason that I crunched some numbers on the offensive side of the ball was to give opportunities on the defensive side of the ball. And again, it's just like, what is the philosophy of this team going to be? Where they want to put their time and resource in helping these players develop. So I have Derek McLendon at number 5 for outside linebackers. Cornerback, we moved some things around. I ended up keeping, pretty easy here. J.C. Horn, DiCaprio Bootle. I think really Michael Jackson's probably going to be your number 2 cornerback. And then Shaw Smith-Wade, who I know is a nickel, but I had to do some rearranging. I know he's played a little bit on the outside as well. So that's the reason I moved him here. And there's another, I can't name every single person I listen to, but I listen to all you guys. So content creators, writers, reporters, I think there's a possibility that the Panthers look at their roster and say, well, and we'll get to the slide in a second, maybe we invest in, or we feel comfortable in Shaw Smith being the 4th cornerback. Of course, I still think there's a possibility with waivers. It's just the nature of where we sit. But we'll talk about why I moved him here in a second. IR Jackson and your practice squad, question mark. I don't know. Unfortunately, Deshaun Jameson has not had a great go at it. Keeps, got burned on that double move. We've seen that a few times, not specifically from him every time, but we've seen that from the Panthers. Lamar Jackson. I have him in his practice squad, but I know he suffered an injury. I don't know if the Panthers decide they want to hang around and wait for him to come back and go through that entire process. So anxious to see kind of where that pans out. Nickel. So this is the reason I moved Shaw over and made a case to have him there, which I know he can play in between. You have veteran Troy Hill and Jamie Robinson. I do have Jamie Robinson making the final 53. Again, folks, I can't predict the 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever players become available on waivers. I can only predict what I see and what I know. This thing will be more fluid. We'll know here in the next few days what this looks like. But I do have Jamie Robinson. He's at a fantastic camp preseason, moving in between nickel, playing safety, possibly being able to contribute on special teams. And that closes out the roster with your safeties and Jordan Fuller, Xavier Woods, who hopefully is back on track, Alex Cook, and Nick Scott. IR, you do have Sam Franklin Jr., like I mentioned, and depending on the severity there. The biggest question that we have on this roster is Damani Richardson. Like, in my opinion, I think this Damani Richardson is a bigger, do they keep him question than Jalen Coker, because he's a playmaker, man. Like, you've seen natural talent, a guy that is intercepted. He's done what he's supposed to do. I think there's a strong chance when you go back and look over at the roster where I was kind of talking through some potential shifts on tight end or wide receiver or whatever position group it is, that, hey, you make room for someone like this. So I do think Damani Richardson is someone that I would watch with potential to be cut. But anyways, folks, that is blazing speed through this. I went over my time. For those who don't know or are just tuning in, I've got to run and jump to go pick up Nolan. What is good, y'all? Sorry, I'm catching up on the chat. I've been speeding through on here. What is good, y'all? 6 cornerbacks, 4 safety. Yep. Folks, I appreciate y'all tuning in. I've got to go pick up Nolan so he's not stranded. I'll have a slower version of this coming out later. The only thing I'll say is shout out to 2 fans in the stands. I got to listen to their panel today, 53-man roster prediction. So if you are looking for a longer episode with a bunch of Panthers content creators, I'd recommend go out there, subscribe to their channel, follow all the fun stuff that goes with that. But until next time, I will see y'all. I got to go jump, but y'all have a good one. Thanks, Palmer. I appreciate that, man.